Marcia Fitz had survived 2 years of being gaslighted by a man who made her doubt her own instincts, and she'd promised herself the day she married Bruce Vetter would be the final proof that she'd escaped. The first sign something was wrong came at 3:42 p.m., 18 minutes into the ceremony, when the officiant asked if anyone present knew of any lawful impediment to this marriage. The second sign was the movement in the back row, a figure standing when everyone else remained seated, flanked by 2 uniformed officers who shouldn't have been at a private garden wedding. Marvin. Her bouquet trembled in her hands. 300 guests filled the chairs she and Bruce had selected together during a weekend trip to the estate. The string ensemble played softly behind white silk drapes. Her dress had cost more than her first car. And now Marvin Trollinger, the ex-boyfriend who'd spent 2 years convincing her she was difficult and ungrateful, was at her wedding with Charleston police, holding what looked like official paperwork. Marcia Fitz, you're under arrest for embezzlement and financial fraud. She couldn't speak. Couldn't process. Because Marvin being here wasn't just vindictive, it was calculated destruction. She'd left their shared business venture 18 months ago after discovering his actual fraud. He'd threatened her then, and promised she'd regret embarrassing him. But arrest? At her wedding? In front of Charleston society, Bruce's family, everyone who'd watched her build a career from nothing? Through the rows of guests, she saw faces turning, phones lifting. Genevieve Hartwell covered her mouth in shock. This was public humiliation weaponized. This was Marvin's final punishment for daring to leave him and marry someone better. Then Bruce spoke. The groom didn't raise his voice, didn't move from his position at the altar, and that stillness was more terrifying than any outburst. His hand remained loose at his side, but Marcia recognized the tension in his shoulders. She'd seen it during gallery openings when competitors tried to undercut her. She'd seen it during dinner with his associates when someone disrespected his sister. She'd seen it in his penthouse during late nights when his control slipped and he touched her like a man who'd spent his whole life learning restraint and was tired of practicing it. Bruce Vetter didn't just command rooms, he owned them. And right now, every person in this garden understood they were in his territory. But he wasn't looking at Marvin or the officers. He was looking at her. Their eyes met across 8 feet of white silk runner, across 6 months of a relationship that burned too hot too fast, across every moment she'd wondered if loving a man this powerful meant losing herself. And Bruce smiled. It wasn't reassuring. It was the smile of a man who'd just been given permission to do what he'd wanted to do all along. Those charges are fabricated, Bruce said to the officers, voice carrying without effort. You'll have verification from the district attorney's office within the hour that this warrant was obtained through fraudulent testimony. This is a legal warrant. The older officer's hand moved to his belt. Ma'am, you need to come with us. She does nothing without her attorney present. Bruce didn't move toward Marvin. Didn't acknowledge him at all. He simply descended the altar steps with the certainty of a man who'd already calculated every possible outcome and decided which one he preferred. The space between them disappeared. Bruce stopped close enough that only she could hear his next words, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the muscle ticking in his jaw. Do you trust me? His voice was barely above a whisper. Yes. The word came out instinctive, immediate, before her brain could catch up to her mouth. Bruce's hand found hers. His grip was absolute, his thumb pressing against her racing pulse, and before Marcia could ask what he was planning, he turned to face the officers and the guests and Marvin standing there with that smug expression that said he thought he'd won. My fiancé isn't going anywhere, Bruce said, voice cutting through the garden like a verdict. But he is. He nodded once, and Marcia watched as Dashiell Cove moved from his position as best man, phone already at his ear, speaking in clipped tones that sounded like orders being executed. 2 men she'd never seen before appeared at the garden entrance, blocking the exit where Marvin stood. What the hell is this? Marvin's confidence cracked. You can't just watch me. Bruce raised their joined hands high enough for every guest, every phone, every witness to see, and spoke 7 words that detonated everything Marcia thought she understood about the man she was marrying. He comes for her, he answers to me. If you want to see exactly how a mafia boss dismantles a man who dared to touch what's his, you need to subscribe right now. Because what Bruce does next will redefine the word revenge. Hit that subscribe button, this is just the beginning. The officers moved forward despite Bruce's declaration, despite the two men blocking exits, despite everything that should have stopped this nightmare from continuing. The older officer with gray at his temples looked apologetic but determined, the kind of determination that came from following orders and believing in the system. "Ma'am, we have a valid warrant. I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." Marcia's fingers went numb. The bouquet of white roses and magnolias dropped to the ground, petals scattering across imported Italian marble that Bruce had specifically chosen because she mentioned once that she loved the veining pattern. 300 guests sat frozen, phones out, documenting her destruction in real time. She could already see the headlines, the social media posts, the whispers that would follow her through every gallery opening and charity gala for the rest of her life. Black woman arrested at society wedding. Of course they'd make it about race. Of course they'd forget she'd built her career through sleepless nights and perfect execution. Of course Marvin knew exactly what he was doing. Bruce's hand tightened on hers before releasing. The loss of his warmth felt like abandonment even though his eyes promised violence. "Don't say anything," he said quietly. "Sable is already on her way." "Who?" "My attorney." His jaw clenched hard enough she could see the muscle jump. "She eats prosecutors for breakfast." The handcuffs were cold against her wrists. The click of metal locking into place sounded impossibly loud in the garden silence. Marcia had never been arrested before, had spent her whole life being careful, being perfect, being exactly what society demanded so they couldn't use her background against her. And here she was, in a $50,000 dress, being led away from her own wedding like a criminal. She caught sight of Marvin as the officers turned her toward the garden path. He stood near the back with that expression she remembered from their worst fights, the one that said he'd won and she should have known better than to challenge him. The restraining order she'd filed hadn't mattered. The evidence she'd gathered of his actual embezzlement hadn't mattered. He'd used his connections, his credibility as a white man in finance, to turn her success into suspicion. "You did this to yourself," Marvin called out, loud enough for guests in the first 10 rows to hear. "I gave you everything and you threw it away for him." Bruce moved so fast Marcia barely tracked it. One moment he was at the altar, the next he was inches from Marvin's face with Dashiell's hand on his shoulder, the only thing stopping whatever violence was about to happen. "Say her name again," Bruce said softly, "and I'll forget we're in public." The threat landed like a physical blow. Marvin actually stepped back, and Marcia felt something crack open in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The officers led her down the garden path between rows of guests who'd come to celebrate and stayed to witness her humiliation. She kept her spine straight, her chin up, even as cameras flashed and whispers erupted. Victoria Hartwell's mother had her phone out, already typing. Tomorrow's society pages would be vicious. But as they reached the garden gate, Marcia looked back once. Bruce stood motionless at the altar in his charcoal suit, watching her leave with eyes that tracked her like she was the only person in the garden, the only person in Charleston, the only person who mattered. His hands hung loose at his sides but she recognized the coiled tension in his posture. She'd seen wounded animals look less dangerous. The patrol car waited beyond the estate gates, door open, and Marcia let them guide her inside because fighting would only make the headlines worse. The door closed with a hollow thunk that sounded like finality. Through the window, she watched the Bellerive estate recede, watched her wedding disappear, watched the life she'd carefully built dissolve into scandal and speculation. Her phone buzzed in the officer's evidence bag. Once. Twice. 7 times in rapid succession. Someone was making calls. Someone was going to war. The holding cell smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Marcia sat on a metal bench bolted to concrete, still wearing her wedding dress, the silk pooling around her like a cruel joke. They'd taken her jewelry, her shoes, Everything except the dress itself, because apparently the Charleston Police Department didn't keep inmate jumpsuits in her size, and processing a society bride required paperwork nobody wanted to handle on a Saturday. 4 hours. She'd been sitting here for 4 hours while her wedding reception presumably continued without her, while guests gossiped and speculated, while Marvin probably celebrated his victory with the same smug satisfaction he'd worn when he convinced her she was too emotional, too sensitive, too much. The worst part wasn't the cell or the fingerprinting or the mug shot they'd taken while she still had her veil pinned in her hair. The worst part was the silence. No phone. No updates. No way to know if Bruce was still at the estate or if he'd decided a woman who came with this much baggage wasn't worth the trouble. "You're catastrophizing," she told herself. Bruce Vedder doesn't abandon investments. Except she wasn't an investment. She was supposed to be his wife. Movement beyond the plexiglass barrier caught her attention. A woman in a black suit strode through the precinct like she owned the building, heels clicking against linoleum with the rhythm of incoming artillery. She was maybe 40, mixed race, with silver streaking through dark hair pulled into a severe bun. Behind her, Bruce moved with that dangerous calm she recognized, the one that meant someone was about to regret their life choices. The woman spoke to the desk sergeant, her voice too low to hear through the barrier, but whatever she said made him reach for his phone immediately. Within 60 seconds, a detective Marcia hadn't seen before appeared, looking harassed. The woman produced documents from a leather briefcase with the efficiency of someone dealing cards. The detective's face went through several shades of pale as he read. Bruce's eyes found Marcia through the plexiglass. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle even through 2 layers of reinforced glass and 15 feet of distance. His suit was wrinkled now, tie loosened, and she realized he'd been here the entire 4 hours, probably in some administrative office making calls and applying pressure. The detective disappeared. Returned 3 minutes later with keys. The woman in the black suit approached the plexiglass holding cell door as it buzzed open, and up close Marcia could see the predatory intelligence in her dark eyes. "Marcia Fitz," the woman said, voice carrying an accent that suggested expensive boarding schools and courtrooms where 6-figure retainers were considered reasonable. "I'm Sable Quinlan, your attorney as of 4 hours ago. The charges against you are being dropped due to prosecutorial misconduct and falsified evidence. You'll be released immediately with a formal apology from the district attorney's office." "How?" The word came out hoarse. Sable's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Let's just say the evidence Mr. Trollinger provided couldn't withstand even preliminary scrutiny. Particularly once we demonstrated he fabricated financial records using your forged signature and filed a fraudulent police report." She stepped aside, and Bruce filled the doorway. His hand extended toward her, steady and sure. "Time to go home." The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the Reverence Building downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Charleston Harbor like a painting Marcia could never afford even on her best commission. Bruce's hand remained on her lower back as he guided her inside, steady pressure that felt more like a brand than comfort. She was still wearing the wedding dress. Still had rice in her hair from when guests had thrown it during the processional before everything imploded. The juxtaposition of standing in this immaculate space, all marble and steel and deliberate masculinity, while looking like a rejected bride from a Gothic novel felt obscene. "Sit," Bruce said, nodding toward the leather sofa that probably cost more than her car. "I'd rather stand." "Marcia." His voice dropped into a register she'd only heard once before, during a gallery showing when a collector put his hands on her without permission and Bruce materialized from across the room like violence given form. "Sit down before you fall down. You haven't eaten in 9 hours." He was right. She was shaking, an adrenaline crash hitting hard now that she was safe. Relatively safe. Safe adjacent. She sank onto the sofa and watched as Bruce shrugged out of his suit jacket, rolled his sleeves to his elbows with mechanical precision, and poured 2 fingers of something amber into crystal glasses. He handed her one without asking if she wanted it. She drank. The whiskey burned all the way down, expensive heat that steadied her hands. Bruce sat across from her in the matching armchair, forearms resting on his knees, close enough to touch but carefully maintaining distance. His eyes held that calculating expression she'd seen at business dinners, the one that meant he was several moves ahead in a game everyone else didn't realize they were playing. Marvin Trollinger made 3 mistakes today, Bruce said conversationally, like he was discussing weather patterns instead of destruction. First, he touched what's mine. Second, he embarrassed you publicly. Third, he assumed I operate within normal legal boundaries. Bruce. Let me finish. He took a measured sip of whiskey. By now, the IRS has received an anonymous tip about unreported income from his consulting business. Approximately $400,000 over 2 years, routed through offshore accounts in Grand Cayman. The evidence is ironclad because I had someone reconstruct his actual financial fraud, the same fraud he tried to pin on you. You've had someone investigating him? Since our 3rd date. Bruce's expression didn't change. You mentioned an ex who made you question your instincts. I don't leave threats unassessed. Marcia's glass stopped halfway to her lips. You've been investigating Marvin for 6 months? 5 months, 3 weeks. He set his glass down with deliberate care. His employment contract has a morality clause. By Monday morning, his firm will have documentation of his arrest record, the falsified police report, and witness statements from 3 women he harassed at previous companies. He'll be terminated for cause, no severance, and blacklisted from every reputable firm between here and Atlanta. The calm in his voice was more terrifying than shouting. This wasn't anger. This was systematic dismantling delivered with the efficiency of someone who'd done it before. What else? Because there's more, I can hear it in your voice. Bruce stood, moved to the window overlooking the harbor where yachts bobbed in the evening tide. His reflection in the glass looked like a man carved from darker materials than normal people. He has a preliminary hearing on the fraud charges Tuesday. Sable will ensure the judge sees evidence of his pattern of behavior, his financial crimes, his abuse of legal systems to harass ex-partners. By Wednesday, he'll be in county lockup with bail set high enough that his family can't cover it. His assets will be frozen pending investigation. His reputation will be destroyed as publicly as he tried to destroy yours. Marcia couldn't breathe. You're ruining his entire life. No. Bruce turned, and the expression on his face made her press back into the sofa. I'm showing him what a proportional response looks like when you come after someone I love. This is me being restrained. The last word hung between them like a threat and a promise. What happens if you're not restrained? Bruce's smile was all edges. Let's hope we never find out. Sunday morning arrived with phone calls Bruce took from the terrace while Marcia pretended to sleep in his bed. She'd spent the night there not because anything happened but because he'd insisted she shouldn't be alone, and she'd been too exhausted to argue about the implications of sleeping in his space while still technically unmarried. Through the open door, she heard fragments. Confirmation codes. Account numbers. Names delivered like ammunition. By noon, Marvin's face was on the local news. White-collar fraud suspect arrested, former business partner vindicates claims of embezzlement. The reporter standing outside Marvin's apartment building used words like systemic deception and pattern of behavior. They showed his perp walk in handcuffs, the same public humiliation he'd orchestrated for her, except this time the charges were real. Marcia watched from the penthouse sofa, coffee growing cold in her hands. His firm released a statement at 2 p.m. Terminated effective immediately for violations of ethical standards and morality clauses. They listed his position as junior associate, a demotion on paper that erased 3 years of his career in a single paragraph. Bruce had somehow convinced them Marvin was never as senior as he'd claimed. That's vicious, Marcia said quietly. Bruce looked up from his laptop where he'd been working through weekend emails with the same focus he'd applied to destroying her ex. That's accurate. He lied on his resume about his MBA credentials. They're just now discovering it. How do you know that? I know everything about threats to what's mine. The words should have felt possessive, suffocating. Instead they felt like armor she'd been missing her whole life. By evening, Marvin's social media presence had been systematically dismantled. Not deleted, worse than deleted. Every professional connection he'd built, every industry group he'd joined, quietly removed him. His LinkedIn profile showed 0 connections. His Twitter account had been suspended for terms of service violations Marcia knew Bruce had manufactured through reports from dozens of fake accounts. Dashiell arrived at 7 with dinner from the French restaurant where Marcia and Bruce had their first date, and a folder thick with documentation. The preliminary hearing is Tuesday at 9 a.m., Dashiell said, setting the folder on Bruce's desk. Sable has 3 character witnesses ready to testify about his harassment patterns. The prosecutor is already discussing plea deals because they know they can't win. What kind of plea? Marcia asked. Bruce answered without looking up from his phone. 18 months minimum security, 5 years probation, permanent record that ensures he never works in finance again. He'll take it because the alternative is a trial where we expose every lie he's ever told and push for maximum sentencing. Marcia set her coffee down carefully. You've been planning this since yesterday. I've been planning this since I learned his name. Bruce finally met her eyes. Yesterday just gave me permission to execute. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with the weight of what she was witnessing. This wasn't justice through proper channels. This was something older, more brutal. This was a man with resources and connections using them to annihilate someone who'd made the mistake of touching what he considered his. She should be horrified. She should be questioning everything about the man she'd agreed to marry. Instead, she thought about 2 years of Marvin making her feel crazy, making her doubt her instincts, making her apologize for his failures. How long until it's over? She asked. Bruce's smile was cold satisfaction. It already is. He just doesn't know it yet. Monday evening, Marcia was reviewing gallery acquisition proposals at Bruce's dining table when the building concierge called. Mr. Trollinger was in the lobby demanding access, claiming he had legal right to speak with Ms. Fitz regarding pending civil litigation. Bruce took the phone from her hand before she could respond. Send him up, he said calmly. Then he made a second call. Get here now. You're letting him come up? Marcia's voice pitched higher than intended. I'm giving him enough rope. Bruce's expression was unreadable as he moved to the bar, poured himself whiskey with steady hands. Stay in the living room. Don't engage with him directly. Bruce. Trust me. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse because of course it did, because men like Bruce Vedder bought entire floors and controlled access like medieval lords. Marvin stumbled out looking 3 days past desperate. His suit was wrinkled, hair uncombed, the kind of disheveled that came from sleeping in cars and skipping meals. His eyes found Marcia and something manic flared there. You vindictive bitch, he spat. You set me up. You planted that evidence and now my entire life is destroyed because you couldn't handle being called out on your incompetence. Marcia opened her mouth but Bruce moved first, placing himself between them with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this before. You have 60 seconds to explain why you're in my home making threats before I have you removed, Bruce said, voice pitched low and dangerous. Your home. Marvin laughed, high and unstable. You think buying her makes her yours? You think money erases what we had? I know her, I know how broken she is, how desperate for validation. You're just the next mistake in a long line of them. The elevator opened again. A man stepped out who made Marcia's breath catch, built like violence and dressed in black tactical gear that suggested he didn't rely on lawyers to solve problems. His eyes swept the room with professional assessment, landing on Marvin with the interest a wolf shows wounded prey. Thaddeus, Bruce said without looking away from Marvin. Our guest is leaving. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Marcia. Marvin's voice cracked. We can settle this, drop the charges, you know I didn't mean for it to go this far. Baby, please, just talk to me. The pet name hit like a slap. Marcia had spent months training herself not to flinch at that word, at the manipulation wrapped in false affection. Don't call her that, Bruce said quietly. Or what? You'll have your thug throw me out? This is harassment. I'll file charges. I'll go to the media about how you're using your money to manipulate the legal system. Thaddeus moved then, covering the distance between them in 3 strides. He didn't touch Marvin, just positioned himself inches away, close enough that Marvin had to crane his neck back to maintain eye contact. The temperature in the room dropped. You broke into a private residence, Thaddeus said, voice like gravel. You verbally assaulted the owner and his fiancée. Security footage shows you pushed past the concierge and bypassed security protocols. That's trespassing, breaking and entering, and assault with threatening language. I didn't break anything, I just... You violated the restraining order Ms. Fitz has against you. Thaddeus produced a phone, showed Marvin the screen. I've already sent the footage to Charleston PD. Your bail will be revoked by morning. Marvin's face went white. You can't. Watch me. Bruce finally moved, stepping close enough that Marvin had to retreat toward the elevator. Here's what's going to happen, Bruce said with devastating calm. You're going to leave Charleston. You're going to accept the plea deal Sable negotiated. You're going to serve your sentence quietly. And if you ever say her name again, if you ever think about her, if you ever breathe in her direction, I won't call the police. The unspoken threat landed like a physical blow. Thaddeus pressed the elevator call button. The doors opened with a soft chime that sounded like a death knell. Time's up, Thaddeus said. Marvin looked at Marcia one last time, searching for something, mercy maybe, or the girl he'd convinced was grateful for his attention. But Marcia stood straighter, met his eyes with steel she'd forgotten she possessed. Goodbye, Marvin. He left without another word, and Marcia finally understood the difference between men who make threats and men who make promises. Thaddeus left 10 minutes after Marvin, and the silence that followed felt like pressure building before a storm. Marcia stood by the windows overlooking the harbor, hands gripping the railing until her knuckles went pale, and tried to remember how to breathe around the rage climbing her throat. 2 years. She'd wasted 2 years on a man who convinced her that her instincts were wrong, that her success was luck, that she should be grateful he tolerated her ambition. 2 years of apologizing for taking up space, for having opinions, for wanting more than he was willing to give. The sound that came out of her wasn't crying, it was something rawer. Fury and grief tangled together until she couldn't separate them. Bruce moved behind her, close enough she could feel his heat but not touching. Waiting. I let him do it, she said, voice breaking. I knew something was wrong and I stayed anyway because leaving felt like admitting failure. Because he made me believe I was the problem. You're not the problem. I questioned everything. Her hands shook. My judgment, my feelings, whether I was being too sensitive or too demanding or too much. He'd do something cruel and then tell me I was overreacting, and I'd apologize. I apologized for his behavior, Bruce. How pathetic is that? It's not pathetic. Bruce's voice remained steady. It's what abusers do. They make you doubt reality until you can't trust yourself. Marcia spun to face him, and the tears came hot and furious. I'm supposed to be smarter than this. I have a master's degree and a career I built from nothing, and I let some mediocre man with a fragile ego convince me I was difficult. Being intelligent doesn't make you immune to manipulation. His eyes held hers without flinching from her anger. He targeted your strengths and turned them into weaknesses. That's not your failure, it's his strategy. Don't defend me right now. The words came out sharp. Don't make excuses or try to fix this. I need to be angry. I need to hate him and hate myself for staying, and hate that I still hear his voice in my head telling me I'm too emotional. Then be angry. Marcia stared at him. That's it? That's all you're going to say? What do you want me to say? Bruce's expression didn't change. That you should have left sooner? That you should have seen through him? You already know that. You don't need me to catalog your mistakes, you need to stop punishing yourself for being human. The validation hit harder than comfort would have. Marcia's knees buckled and she sank onto the nearest chair, pressing her palms against her eyes. "I'm furious," she whispered. "At him, at myself, at every moment I made myself smaller to make him comfortable. And I'm terrified that I'll do it again, that I'll turn into the version of myself he created." Bruce knelt in front of her, hands resting on the chair arms, caging her in without touching. "Look at me." She did. "You're not that woman anymore," he said quietly. "You left him. You built a career he tried to sabotage. You survived his worst and came out stronger. And if you start making yourself smaller, I'll notice, and I'll call you on it, because the woman I'm marrying doesn't apologize for existing. What if I need to be angry for a while? Then be angry." His mouth curved slightly. "Burn the world down if you need to. I'll hand you the matches." Something cracked open in her chest, the part she'd kept locked down for fear of being too much. Bruce wasn't trying to soothe her or minimize her rage or convince her to be reasonable. He was holding space for the full scope of her fury without flinching. This is what partnership looked like. Not fixing, not controlling, just witnessing. Marcia reached out, fingers curling into his shirt, and pulled him closer until their foreheads touched. "Thank you," she breathed. "For what?" "For letting me be a mess without trying to clean me up." Bruce's hands finally moved, cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything violent about him. "You're not a mess," he said against her mouth. "You're magnificent. This is the turning point." Marcia's about to discover the full truth about the man she's choosing, and it's darker than you think. If you're invested in this story, subscribe so you don't miss what happens when she meets his family and learns what Bruce really is. The stakes are about to get deadly. Tuesday afternoon, Bruce drove them to the industrial district where shipping containers stacked like metallic building blocks and cranes moved against gray sky. The warehouse he pulled up to looked abandoned from the outside, windows dark, no signage indicating legitimate business. "This is where your sister works?" Marcia asked carefully. "This is where my sister runs half of Charleston's import operations." Bruce cut the engine. "The legal half, anyway." The distinction landed like a warning. Inside, the warehouse transformed into something else entirely. The front was legitimate shipping logistics, computers and manifests and workers moving with efficient purpose. But Bruce led her past that, through a door that required fingerprint access, into offices that felt more like war rooms. Maps covered walls showing routes and territories. Computer screens displayed real-time tracking data that seemed too sophisticated for standard shipping. A woman looked up from a conference table covered in spreadsheets, and Marcia immediately understood this was Temperance Vetter. Same dark hair, same assessing eyes, but where Bruce contained his danger behind expensive suits, his sister wore hers openly. She was beautiful in the way knives were beautiful, all sharp edges and deliberate design. "So this is the gallery curator who survived Marvin Trollinger and a very public arrest," Temperance said, standing to shake Marcia's hand with a grip that tested. "Bruce has been insufferable about you for 6 months. Nice to finally meet the woman worth all that obsession." "Temperance," Bruce said mildly. "What?" "I'm being nice." She smiled, and it was warmer than Marcia expected. "Anyone who can handle my brother's intensity and still want to marry him deserves respect and possibly hazard pay." The movement behind them announced another arrival. The man who entered was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of presence that made everyone in the room unconsciously straighten. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than Marcia's car and moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently. "Salvatore Kane," Bruce said. "My mentor." "Sal, this is Marcia." "The woman who's caused quite the commotion," Salvatore said, accent carrying traces of Italian neighborhoods and old money. "Bruce tells me you have a remarkable eye for art authentication." Among other things, Marcia managed. Salvatore's smile was all calculation. "Sit, please. We should discuss what you're walking into." They gathered around the conference table, and Temperance pulled up files on her laptop. These are our operations, she said without preamble. Legitimate import-export through 6 shell companies. Real estate holdings across 3 states. Investment portfolios in tech and pharmaceuticals. Bruce handles the money side, I handle logistics and distribution. Distribution of what? Marcia asked. Whatever needs distributing, Temperance said evenly. Sometimes it's legal goods. Sometimes it's information. Sometimes it's leverage. Salvatore leaned forward, hands clasped. The Vetter family has operated in Charleston for 3 generations, he said. We provide services the city needs but can't officially acknowledge. Protection for businesses. Resolution of disputes that can't go through proper channels. Access to resources when traditional systems fail. You're talking about organized crime, Marcia said flatly. We're talking about power structures that exist whether society acknowledges them or not. Bruce's voice carried no apology. My grandfather built this infrastructure. My father expanded it. I legitimized portions while maintaining the connections that make us untouchable. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Why are you telling me this now? Marcia looked between them. Why not before the wedding? Because you needed to choose me first, Bruce said quietly. Before understanding the cost. Temperance closed her laptop. Marrying Bruce means you're part of this whether you participate or not. You'll be targeted by rivals. Protected by associates. Watched by law enforcement who know what we are but can't prove it. Your gallery will be scrutinized. Your past will be investigated. Your friendships will be tested. And if I can't handle it? Salvatore's expression softened slightly. Then Bruce will let you go, because he loves you enough to want you happy more than he wants you his. But make no mistake, Miss Fitz, walking away now doesn't erase what you've seen. It just means you face the consequences alone instead of with his protection. Marcia looked at Bruce, at the man who'd dismantled her ex's life with terrifying efficiency, who'd held space for her rage without trying to fix her, who was offering her a throne in a kingdom built on shadows and violence. How many people have you killed? She asked. Bruce's eyes never left hers. Directly? None. Ordered? More than I'd tell you on a second meeting. The honesty was more terrifying than a lie would have been. They left the warehouse an hour later, and Bruce drove them to the Battery where historic homes faced the harbor and tourists took photos pretending they understood the weight of old Southern money. He parked overlooking the water, engine running, neither of them moving to get out. I need to know if you can live with this, Bruce said finally. Not tolerate it. Not look the other way. Actually live with knowing what I am and what I've done. Marcia watched sailboats drift across gray water. I've spent my whole life being careful, she said quietly. Following rules. Building a career through legitimate channels. Being twice as good to get half as far because that's what women who look like me have to do. And you're asking me to marry into something that exists outside all of that. I'm asking you to choose. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. I can give you safety, resources, a life where you never worry about men like Marvin again. But it comes with costs you can't predict and consequences I can't always control. Why me? Marcia turned to face him. You could have anyone. Women who grew up in this world, who understand the rules, who wouldn't question the violence. Because they see the reputation and not the man. Bruce's jaw clenched. They see Bruce Vetter, untouchable, dangerous, useful. You see me. The parts I've buried, the things I'm ashamed of, the nights I can't sleep because of choices I've made. You look at me and you're not afraid, but you're not impressed either. You just see a man trying to be better than his worst moments. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in her chest. I see someone who destroyed my ex to protect me, she said. Someone who held space for my rage without trying to fix it. Someone who's showing me the worst parts of his world because he respects me enough to let me choose with full knowledge. And can you choose this? The question came out raw. Can you love someone who operates in the shadows, who has blood on his hands even if I've never held the weapon myself? Can you build a life knowing your husband is capable of terrible things? Marcia reached across the console, fingers curling around him. Everyone is capable of terrible things given the right circumstances, she said quietly. The difference is you own what you are. You don't pretend to be something safer, something easier. And you're giving me the choice Marvin never did. Bruce's eyes met hers, searching for doubt or fear or the moment she'd run. I choose you, Marcia said. Not despite the darkness. Not ignoring it. I choose you with full knowledge of what that means. Because you see me too, Bruce. You see the woman I am beneath all the performance, and you've never asked me to be smaller. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I will protect you with everything I have, he said. I will give you power and partnership and a life where you never have to apologize for existing. But I can't promise it will be easy. I don't want it to be easy. Her voice steadied. I want real. I want someone who matches my intensity instead of trying to dim it. I want you. Bruce kissed her then, desperate and claiming, and Marcia kissed him back with all the fury and love and certainty she'd been holding back. When they broke apart, she was smiling. So when's the actual wedding? You're about to witness one of the most powerful wedding ceremonies you've ever heard. No 300 guests, no public spectacle, just two people choosing partnership over everything else. Subscribe right now because this ending is worth it, and you'll want to be here for every story we tell. Thursday morning arrived wrapped in fog, the kind that turned Charleston Harbor into something from a dream or a warning. Bruce's yacht, the Reckoning, sat anchored beyond the marina where private vessels bobbed in gentle current. Marcia wore ivory silk, simpler than the wedding dress that had ended up evidence in a police report, but infinitely more her. No veil. No audience. Just the woman she'd decided to become. Dashiell stood near the bow in a dark suit, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else but committed to his role as witness and best man. Sable wore black because of course she did, tablet in hand containing the marriage license she'd expedited through channels Marcia had stopped questioning. The officiant was a Judge Salvatore New, a woman who owed the Vetter family enough favors that she arrived at 5 in the morning without complaint. She kept the ceremony brief, no performative poetry or religious platitudes, just the legal minimums and space for personal vows. Bruce spoke first. I can't promise you safety, he said, voice carrying over water and fog. I can't promise you a normal life or a husband who operates inside traditional boundaries. But I can promise you a partnership. A throne beside mine in a kingdom most people pretend doesn't exist. I can promise you'll never be alone in the dark, because I live there, and I'll hold your hand through every shadow. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made the sunrise seem dim by comparison. I promise to see you, always. The brilliant woman who refuses to be smaller. The survivor who turned trauma into strength. The only person who looks at me and sees both the monster and the man, and chooses both. Marcia's turn. She'd written her vows on hotel stationery at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, needing to articulate what she was choosing. I spent years making myself palatable, she said. Swallowing anger to seem professional. Dimming my lights so others felt comfortable. Apologizing for wanting more than I was offered. And then I met you, and you handed me matches and told me to burn it down. Bruce's mouth curved slightly. I'm not choosing safety, Marcia continued. I'm choosing the truth. I'm choosing a partner who respects my strength enough to show me his weakness. I'm choosing a man who sees power as something we build together, not something he grants me conditionally. I promise to stand beside you in your darkness, to call you on your worst instincts, and to love you without requiring you to be someone softer. She took a breath, steadied herself. I promise to be your partner, not your possession. Your equal, not your responsibility. And I promise that if you ever make me feel small, I'll remind you exactly who I am. The judge pronounced them married as the sun broke through fog, turning the harbor gold. Bruce kissed her like he was claiming territory and offering devotion in equal measure, and Marcia kissed him back with the fury of a woman who'd finally stopped apologizing for existing. Dashiell clapped once, slow and deliberate. Sable actually smiled. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Vetter," Sable said. "Try not to get arrested again. The paperwork is exhausting." Marcia laughed, and it sounded like freedom. Bruce pulled her close, lips against her ear. "Ready for the rest of your life?" She looked at the man she'd married, dangerous and devoted, offering her a crown made of shadows and devotion. "Absolutely."